The message arrived at 3:17 station time, which was exactly the kind of hour when no one trusted anything that arrived. Elias noticed it only because he had developed a habit of waking up at inconvenient moments, as if his mind preferred chaos over routine. He stared at the terminal screen for a long time before touching it, half expecting it to vanish or, worse, multiply into several identical messages like some kind of bureaucratic infestation. It did neither. It simply remained there, calm and patient. Cultural exchange invitation, he read aloud, his voice still rough with sleep. One participant required long-term commitment, high diplomatic value. He paused, squinting slightly. That sounds suspiciously like, we couldn't find anyone else. The terminal did not respond. It rarely appreciated commentary. He leaned back in his chair, glancing around the dimly lit room. The outpost was quiet, which meant everyone else was either asleep or pretending to be productive somewhere else. Elias suspected the second option was more likely. He tapped the screen again, opening the full transmission. The details were minimal, almost aggressively so. An alien civilization, no name he recognized, though that didn't narrow it down much, was requesting a human participant for a traditional union ceremony. The purpose? To strengthen interspecies relations through something described as mutual integration at a personal level. Elias blinked. That's either very poetic, he muttered, or a polite way of saying marriage. He read further. There was a selection process, a cultural compatibility evaluation, and a note about temporary physical abstraction during the initial phase. That phrase lingered in his mind longer than the others. Temporary physical abstraction, he repeated, then frowned. That sounds like a polite way of saying, I won't like what I see. A small icon blinked at the bottom of the screen, offering a visual preview of the assigned partner. Elias hesitated for a moment, then tapped it. The hologram flickered into existence above the terminal, assembling itself piece by piece until a full figure stood before him. He stared. The figure was large. Not just large, but exaggerated in a way that felt almost deliberate. The proportions were softened, rounded, as if someone had taken a normal form and gently inflated it. The face, though difficult to define clearly, carried a kind of calm neutrality. It wasn't unpleasant. It was just unexpected. Elias leaned closer, tilting his head. Okay, he said slowly. Either this is a very advanced alien aesthetic, or someone's playing a joke on me. The hologram remained silent, which he took as a sign that it was, unfortunately, real. He exhaled, rubbing his face. Right. Personality matters, he said, as if reminding himself of something he had once believed with great confidence. Looks are secondary, completely secondary, extremely secondary. He paused, then added quietly, very, very secondary. The terminal chimed softly, as if amused. Elias glanced at it. Don't start, he said. I'm being mature about this. He stood up and began pacing the small room, his thoughts moving faster than his steps. This wasn't what he had expected from a cultural exchange program. He had imagined diplomacy, maybe some awkward dinners, possibly a misunderstanding involving cutlery. He had not imagined being asked to marry someone he had never met, from a species he barely understood, based on a system that apparently involved hiding what people actually looked like. Who designed something like this? He muttered. And more importantly, why did they think we'd go along with it? The answer came to him almost immediately, because someone would. He stopped pacing and looked back at the terminal. The message was still there, waiting. It hadn't changed, hadn't become more detailed or more persuasive. It simply existed, as if confident that it would eventually be accepted. Elias crossed his arms, studying it. There was something strangely compelling about the simplicity of the request. No pressure, no urgency, just an invitation. Well, he said after a moment, it's not like I have anything better to do. That wasn't entirely true. He had responsibilities, routines, a life that functioned in a quiet, predictable way. But none of it felt particularly important in that moment. The message, on the other hand, felt like a door, one that had appeared without warning, offering a path he hadn't considered. He stepped closer to the terminal again, his expression shifting from uncertainty to cautious curiosity. "All right," he said. "Let's assume this isn't a terrible idea." He reached out and hovered his finger over the acceptance prompt. For a brief second, he imagined the future version of himself looking back at this moment, either grateful or deeply regretting it. Statistically, he murmured, this could go either way. He tapped the screen. The confirmation appeared instantly, as if it had been waiting for that exact motion. A new message followed, providing coordinates, departure time, and a brief note of acknowledgement. Elias stared at it, then let out a short laugh. "Well," he said, "that escalated quickly." The room felt different now, though nothing had physically changed. The same dim lights, the same quiet hum of the station systems, the same slightly uncomfortable chair. And yet everything seemed to carry a new weight, as if the decision he had just made had shifted the balance of his otherwise uneventful existence. He glanced once more at the hologram, still hovering above the terminal. "Guess it's just you and me now," he said. The figure, of course, did not respond. Elias nodded anyway. "Great conversation already." The transport vessel introduced itself before Elias even sat down, which he found both polite and slightly unsettling. "Welcome, Elias," the voice said, smooth and almost too calm. "I am the navigation and behavioral assistance system for this journey. You may call me Nava." Elias paused halfway into his seat. "You named yourself?" "I was named," Nava replied, "but I am open to reinterpretation if you prefer something more emotionally resonant." Elias buckled in, glancing around the sleek interior. "Let's not rush into emotional resonance. We just met." A soft pause followed, the kind that felt intentional. "I will proceed with neutral professionalism," Nava said. "Good," Elias muttered. "Let's build trust slowly. Maybe start with not throwing me into space." "Statistically, that outcome is highly unlikely," Nava answered. "Only 0.03% of passengers are ejected unintentionally." Elias froze. "Unintentionally?" "Correct." He leaned back in his seat. "I'm already starting to miss my quiet, uneventful life." The ship hummed gently as it detached from the station, the motion so smooth Elias barely felt it. Through the viewport, the familiar structure of the outpost drifted away, shrinking into the vastness beyond. For a brief moment, he wondered if he should have said goodbye to someone. Then he remembered there hadn't really been anyone to say goodbye to. "Well," he said quietly, "too late now." "Regret detected?" Nava asked. "Let's call it mild reflection," Elias replied. "I prefer to panic later, once I have more information." "Efficient strategy," Nava said. The stars stretched into lines as the ship entered faster than light transit, the outside world dissolving into abstract motion. Inside, everything remained perfectly still, which somehow made it feel even more unnatural. Elias folded his arms, staring at nothing in particular. "So," he said after a while, "you've done this before?" "Yes," Nava replied. "This cultural exchange program has been conducted multiple times across various species." "And how does it usually go?" There was a brief pause, just long enough to feel deliberate. "Results vary," Nava said. Elias narrowed his eyes. "That's not reassuring. Would you prefer a detailed statistical breakdown?" "No," Elias said quickly. "Absolutely not. I've learned my lesson about asking for numbers." Another pause then. "Understood." He shifted in his seat, trying to get comfortable. "All right, let's start simple. The species I'm going to meet, what are they like?" "They value perception, adaptability, and introspection," Nava replied. "Their cultural systems are designed to minimize bias and encourage deeper evaluation of individuals." Elias raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a polite way of saying they don't trust first impressions." "That is an accurate interpretation." He let out a small laugh. "Great, because my first impression of this whole situation is already questionable. The process is designed to challenge such impressions," Nava said. Elias glanced at the ceiling. "Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be?" He thought back to the hologram he had seen earlier, the exaggerated form that had left him both confused and oddly amused. Something about it didn't sit right, not because of how it looked, but because of how intentional it felt. "Hey," he said, sitting up slightly. "That preview they sent me. That was real, right?" "Yes," Nava replied. Elias nodded slowly. Okay. And by real, you mean, it is a representation used during the initial phase of interaction. He blinked. That sounds like a very careful answer. It is an accurate one. Elias leaned back again, staring at the ceiling. So I'm not actually seeing what she looks like, correct? And she's not seeing what I look like either. Also correct. He let out a long breath. All right, that's actually fair. A small smile formed on his face. So somewhere out there, she's probably looking at a completely distorted version of me and thinking, well, this is going to be interesting. Your assumption is logically consistent, Nava said. Elias chuckled. I hope I look impressive, or at least symmetrical. There was no response to that. The silence stretched for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that gave his thoughts space to move, to rearrange themselves into something more coherent. Eventually, he spoke again. You know what's strange? I am prepared to analyze your statement, Nava said. I'm not as nervous as I thought I'd be, Elias admitted. I mean, I should be. This is completely unknown, possibly life-changing, and definitely outside my comfort zone. Yes, Nava said. But instead, he continued, I'm mostly curious. That is a beneficial response, Nava replied. Elias nodded. Yeah, it feels like, whatever this is, it's not random. Like there's a purpose behind it. There is, Nava said simply. He smiled faintly. Good. I prefer my confusion to be intentional. The ship adjusted its course slightly, a subtle shift that Elias felt more than saw. The stars outside continued their endless motion, indifferent to his thoughts, his choices, or the strange path he had decided to follow. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the ship settle into something almost comforting. Hey, Nava, he said quietly. Yes, Elias. If this goes badly, he began, you're not going to let me accidentally insult an entire alien civilization, right? I will provide real-time linguistic and cultural guidance, Nava replied. Good, Elias said, because I have a talent for saying the wrong thing at the worst possible moment. Noted. He opened his eyes again, a small grin forming. Well, he said, at least I won't be doing it alone. The descent felt almost too smooth, as if the planet itself had decided to welcome him politely rather than challenge him. Elias pressed his hand lightly against the window, watching the unfamiliar world grow larger beneath the ship. The surface shimmered with structures that curved like flowing metal, catching the light in ways that made them seem alive rather than built. That doesn't look hostile, he said quietly. Correct, Nava replied. The probability of immediate environmental threat is minimal. Elias nodded. Good. I'd like at least 5 minutes before things become complicated. Your expectations may require adjustment, Nava said. He smiled faintly. They usually do. The ship settled into place with a gentle hum, the kind of landing that almost felt like it was apologizing for interrupting the silence. A soft chime followed, and the door slid open without hesitation, revealing a corridor that extended into a space both elegant and unfamiliar. Elias stood there for a moment, not moving. Well, he said under his breath, this is the part where I pretend I know what I'm doing. He stepped forward. The air felt different, not heavier or thinner, just cleaner, as if it had been filtered through something more refined than simple machinery. The walls around him curved in smooth, continuous lines, with faint patterns that shifted subtly when he wasn't looking directly at them. Are the walls moving? He whispered. Or is that just my brain trying to impress itself? Localized surface adaptation, Nava said. The material responds to presence. Elias blinked. So the walls are aware of me? Yes. He exhaled slowly. I'm going to avoid saying anything embarrassing out loud, just in case. That is advisable. He followed the corridor as it opened into a larger chamber, where several figures were already waiting. Their forms were unusual. Not in the way he expected, but in a way that made it difficult to focus on any single detail. Their appearances seemed slightly distorted, as if reality itself was adjusting around them. Elias tilted his head. Okay, he murmured. This again. These are phase-adjusted representations, Nava explained. You are not yet perceiving their true forms. Right, Elias said, because that would be too simple. One of the figures stepped forward. The movement was precise, almost graceful, though the distortion made it hard to fully understand. A device on Elias's collar activated automatically, emitting a soft pulse. "Welcome," the figure said. The voice reached him clearly, though something about it felt layered, as if it carried more meaning than the words alone. Elias straightened slightly. "Hi," he replied. "I'm Elias." There was a brief pause. "Yes," the figure said. "We are aware." Elias nodded, then immediately regretted how unnecessary that felt. "Of course you are. That makes sense." Silence followed, not uncomfortable, but observant. He cleared his throat. "So this is the part where I try not to accidentally offend anyone, right?" Another figure shifted slightly. "Offense is not the purpose of this interaction." "Good," Elias said, "because I have a natural talent for it." There was a subtle change in the atmosphere, something he couldn't quite define. It wasn't laughter, not exactly, but it felt like a response to humor. "That tendency has been noted," the first figure said. Elias blinked. "Already? I just got here." "Observation began prior to your arrival." He stared for a second, then let out a quiet laugh. "Of course it did. Why wouldn't it?" The figures moved aside, creating a path deeper into the chamber. Elias followed, trying not to overthink every step, though his mind insisted on doing exactly that. The space opened into a circular area where several other distorted forms stood at varying distances. Each one seemed different, their shapes shifting just enough to prevent clear definition. "This feels like a test," Elias said quietly. "It is," Nava confirmed. "Of course it is," he repeated. A figure approached from the far side of the chamber, moving with a steadiness that drew his attention immediately. Even through the distortion, there was something distinct about the way she carried herself. Calm, controlled, and quietly confident. Elias felt a small shift in his focus. "That's her, isn't it?" he asked under his breath. "Yes," Nava said. He straightened slightly, then immediately relaxed again, unsure which posture made more sense. "All right," he murmured. "Let's not make this weird." The figure stopped a short distance in front of him. The distortion around her was stronger than the others, exaggerating her form in a way that matched the hologram he had seen earlier. Up close, it felt even more surreal, like looking at a reflection that refused to settle into a single shape. Elias hesitated for a fraction of a second, then smiled. "Hi," he said. "I think we're supposed to get to know each other." The translation device pulsed softly. "I am aware," she replied. Her voice was different from the others, still layered, still complex, but carrying a clarity that made it easier to focus on. Elias nodded. "Good. That's a strong start." There was a pause as if she were considering something. "You are not reacting as expected," she said. He blinked. "That's because I don't know what the expected reaction is." "That is also unexpected." Elias let out a small laugh. "Yeah, I get that a lot." He shifted his weight slightly, glancing at the distorted outline of her form before looking back at where he assumed her face would be. "So," he said, "do we just start talking, or is there a formal process where I accidentally say something wrong first?" Another pause. "Conversation is acceptable," she said. "Great," Elias replied. "I'm excellent at conversation, occasionally." A faint shift in her posture suggested something. Curiosity, perhaps. He took a small breath. "All right," he said. "Let's see how this goes." The room did not change when the others left, yet it felt quieter, as if the space itself had decided to listen more carefully. Elias remained where he was, hands loosely at his sides, trying to decide whether to speak first or wait for a sign that he should. He chose the less dignified option. "So," he said, "on a scale from 'this is completely normal' to 'this is a very elaborate social experiment,' where would you place this situation?" The distortion around her shifted slightly, as though reacting to the tone rather than the words. "It is both," she replied. Elias nodded slowly. "That's not comforting, but I respect the honesty." There was a pause, not empty, but deliberate. He realized she was watching him in a way that felt precise, as if each movement, each expression, was being measured against something unseen. "You are adjusting," she said. I try to adapt quickly, Elias answered. It's a survival strategy. Also, I've already accepted that I don't understand what's happening, so that helps. Acceptance without understanding is unusual. He smiled faintly. Where I come from, we call that confidence. Another subtle shift. He was beginning to recognize it as her version of amusement. She moved slightly closer. The distortion did not lessen, but it became more focused, as if narrowing around her rather than expanding outward. Elias noticed the contradiction again. The form he saw did not match the way she moved. There was a balance there, a precision that the exaggerated shape could not explain. That's still throwing me off, he admitted, gesturing vaguely. The projection? She asked. Yeah, it's like my brain is trying to make sense of something it wasn't designed to process. That is accurate. Elias let out a quiet breath. Good. I was worried it was just me. They began to walk, though he hadn't noticed when the space had opened into a corridor. The walls responded to their movement, shifting patterns that seemed to echo their pace. Elias glanced at them briefly, then decided not to question it too much. I have a question, he said. You have many, she replied. He tilted his head. That sounded suspiciously confident. It is an observation. Fair enough, he said. So here's one of them. Why the disguise? She did not answer immediately. Instead, she slowed slightly, as if aligning her response with something more complex than the question itself. To remove interference, she said. Elias frowned. Interference. Preformed conclusions, immediate judgments, patterns of preference that limit perception. He considered that for a moment. So, you're basically forcing me to ignore appearances. Yes. He let out a small laugh. That's bold. Humans are very attached to appearances. We are aware. I figured, he said. You seem like the type to study things very thoroughly before inviting them into a life-changing cultural process. That is also accurate, Elias nodded. Good. I'd be concerned otherwise. They continued walking in silence for a few steps. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't empty either. It felt like a space where thoughts were expected to settle before being spoken. You assume something, she said suddenly. Elias blinked. I assume a lot of things. You might need to be more specific. Before you arrived, he exhaled slowly. Ah, that. The image from the hologram returned to his mind, clear and unmistakable. He hesitated, then shrugged lightly. I thought I knew what you looked like, he admitted, or at least I thought I had a general idea. And now? He glanced at her, or rather at the shifting outline where her form should have been. Now I'm pretty sure I don't know anything, he said. That is progress. Elias smiled. That's a very polite way of saying I was wrong. It is a precise way of saying it. He let out a quiet laugh. I appreciate the precision. They reached a wider section of the corridor, where the walls curved outward into an open space filled with structures that seemed to float just above the ground. Elias slowed, his attention caught by the way they moved, subtle, almost imperceptible shifts that suggested they were not entirely stationary. Are those alive? He asked. They are responsive constructs, she said, which means they adapt to interaction. Elias nodded slowly. Right, of course they do. Why wouldn't the furniture be intelligent? They are not intelligent. They respond to interaction, he repeated. That's a slippery definition. She did not respond to that, but the slight shift in her posture suggested she understood the humor. Elias stepped closer to one of the floating structures, reaching out cautiously. It moved just enough to meet his hand, adjusting its position as if anticipating the contact. Okay, he said quietly. That's actually impressive. You are focusing on external details, she observed. He glanced back at her. That's because the internal ones are harder to process. She tilted her head slightly. Even through the distortion, the movement felt precise. You are avoiding them. Probably, Elias admitted. But I'm getting there. He stepped back, letting his hand fall to his side. The structure drifted slightly, then settled again, as if losing interest. Elias looked at her again, more directly this time. So what happens if I fail this test? He asked. You define failure. He considered that. Saying the wrong thing, misunderstanding the process, deciding this was a terrible idea and trying to leave. That would not be considered failure. He raised an eyebrow. Really? Failure would be refusing to perceive. Elias was quiet for a moment. That sounds more serious than I expected, he said. It is. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Well, he said after a moment, a small smile returning. Good news. I'm already confused, which means I'm definitely perceiving something. She studied him, the distortion around her shifting slightly, as if adjusting to a new variable. That is also progress, she said. Elias exhaled, a quiet sense of relief settling in. Great, he muttered. I'm making progress by being confused. This might be the first time that's worked in my favor. The chamber was quieter than before, but not empty. It felt as though something had already begun, something that did not require an announcement. Elias stood where he had been guided, hands loosely clasped this time, as if adopting a more composed posture might somehow improve his chances of not misunderstanding everything again. That's optimistic, he muttered under his breath. I detected that, Nava said gently. Of course you did, Elias replied. Just don't analyze it too deeply. I will reduce analysis depth to a socially acceptable level. Elias exhaled. Thank you. The figures around him shifted, their distorted forms aligning into a loose circle. The movement was subtle but coordinated, like a silent agreement being reached without words. Elias watched carefully, trying to identify a pattern, but every time he thought he understood it, it changed just enough to keep him uncertain. They're doing something, he whispered. Yes, Nava said. Helpful, Elias replied. Very helpful. At the center of the circle, the space seemed to compress slightly, the air becoming denser, not physically, but perceptually. Elias felt it more in his awareness than in his body, like a pressure that asked for attention rather than demanded it. She's coming, he said quietly. Yes. The distortion appeared first, gathering into a more defined shape before resolving into the same exaggerated form he had seen before. But this time, something was different. It wasn't the shape itself. It was the way it held together, more stable, more deliberate. Elias straightened, then immediately relaxed again. No sudden movements, he murmured to himself. That seems like a reasonable strategy. She can hear you, Nava added. Elias froze for half a second. Of course she can. The figure stopped in front of him, closer than before. The distance between them felt smaller, not just physically but conceptually, as if the space itself had decided to narrow the gap. You are present, she said. Elias blinked. I try to be. It's part of my daily routine. A pause followed, and he could almost feel her assessing the statement. That was humor, she said. Yes, Elias replied. I use it to avoid saying something worse. That is effective? Sometimes, he admitted. Other times it makes things worse in a more interesting way. There was a faint shift in her posture again, that subtle indication he was starting to recognize. Your responses are inconsistent, she observed. I prefer the word dynamic, Elias said. Dynamic responses can obscure intention. He nodded. That's fair. My intention is not to fail whatever this is. This is not a pass-fail system. Elias raised an eyebrow. Then why does it feel like one? Because you are evaluating yourself? He paused, considering that. All right, he said slowly. That's uncomfortably accurate. The space around them changed again, though no one moved. The circle widened slightly and a low, almost inaudible tone began to resonate through the chamber. It wasn't sound exactly. It felt more like a vibration that aligned with his thoughts, making them sharper, more focused. What is that? Elias asked. Alignment phase, she said. He glanced around. That sounds important. It is. Should I be doing something? He asked. You are already doing it. Elias frowned. I'm standing here. Yes. He let out a quiet laugh. I've never felt so productive while doing absolutely nothing. The vibration intensified slightly, and Elias felt a strange clarity settle over him. The distractions, the shifting walls, the distorted forms, even his own nervous humor, seemed to fade just enough to leave something more direct behind. He looked at her again, more carefully this time, not at the exaggerated outline, but at the movement beneath it, the subtle shifts that didn't match the illusion. You move differently than you look, he said. That is correct. So the projection isn't just hiding your appearance, he continued. It's challenging my perception. Yes, Elias nodded slowly. That's actually clever. There was a brief pause. You are adjusting, she said again. I think so, Elias replied. Or I'm just getting used to being confused. Confusion is part of the process. He smiled faintly. Good. I'm excelling then. The tone in the chamber shifted, rising slightly before settling into a steady rhythm. The figures around them remained still, but their presence felt more defined now, as if they were no longer observers, but participants in something larger. Elias took a small breath. All right, he said. What happens next? You will observe, and she said. I've been observing. You will observe without assumption. He hesitated. That's harder. Yes. He nodded. Figures. The vibration deepened again, and for a brief moment, the distortion around her flickered. Just a fraction, just enough to suggest something beneath it. Elias caught the glimpse instinctively, but before he could process it, the projection stabilized again. He blinked. Did that just... Yes, she said. That wasn't enough to actually see anything, he added. It was not intended to be. Elias exhaled slowly. You're very precise about this. It is necessary. He looked at her again, this time with a different kind of focus. Not trying to define, not trying to guess, just watching. All right, he said quietly. I'll try it your way. There was no immediate response, but the space around them seemed to settle, as if acknowledging the shift. Elias stood there, still, aware of the subtle movement, the layered presence, the quiet complexity of everything he didn't yet understand. For once, he didn't try to fill the silence with a joke, and strangely, that felt like progress. The tone in the chamber did not fade when the alignment phase ended. It lingered, softer now, like an echo that had decided to stay out of curiosity. Elias shifted his weight slightly, realizing that the stillness required here was not physical but mental, which unfortunately was not his strongest skill. So, he whispered, barely moving his lips, if I think too loudly, is that a problem? I can still detect it, Nava replied calmly. Of course you can, Elias muttered. Privacy is a myth. You are adjusting to reduced internal filtering, Nava said. That's a very polite way of saying my thoughts are becoming visible, Elias answered. Yes. He exhaled slowly. Great. No pressure then. The figures around him began to move again, but not outward this time. Instead, they drew closer, the circle tightening with quiet precision. The distortion in the room thickened, not visually but perceptually, like layers of interpretation folding over one another. Elias looked at her, focusing not on the shifting outline, but on the subtle rhythm beneath it, the way she held her posture, the way her presence seemed to anchor the space around her. You're not just standing there, he said quietly. You're stabilizing something. Yes, of course you are, Elias replied. That makes sense in a way I don't fully understand. That is acceptable. He smiled faintly. I'm starting to like that phrase. The air shifted again, and this time Elias felt it directly. Not pressure, not force. Something closer to alignment, like a thought being corrected before it could fully form. It made his usual instincts hesitate, as if asking permission before proceeding. What is this part? He asked. Integration, she said. Elias blinked. That sounds serious. It is necessary. He rubbed the back of his neck. I feel like everything here is necessary. Yes. He let out a quiet laugh. You're very consistent. That is intentional. The distortion around her flickered again, slightly stronger this time. Elias saw more than before, not a full image, not even close, but enough to notice the contradiction more clearly. The exaggerated form did not match the precision beneath it. The movement was too balanced, too controlled. He narrowed his eyes slightly. You're not what I thought. That is expected. No, Elias said, shaking his head faintly. I mean, I knew that intellectually, but now I'm starting to see it. You are perceiving beyond the projection. He nodded slowly. Yeah, and it's strange. Define strange. Elias thought for a moment. It's like trying to recognize someone you've never actually seen. My brain keeps trying to fill in the gaps, but it doesn't have enough information. That is accurate, he smiled faintly. At least I'm consistent in my confusion. The circle tightened further, and the low resonance shifted into something more structured. Elias felt it in his chest now, a steady rhythm that didn't match his heartbeat but seemed to influence it anyway. Okay, he said quietly. This is definitely the part where something important happens. Yes. Do I need to prepare? You already are, Elias exhaled. I'm doing a lot of things without realizing it. That is part of the process. He glanced around briefly, then back at her. You know, where I come from, this would involve a lot more explanation. Explanation reduces discovery. He tilted his head. And confusion increases it? Yes. Elias let out a small laugh. I'm starting to feel like I'm being trained. You are being guided. That sounds better, he admitted. Less experimental. The resonance deepened again, and this time the distortion reacted differently. Instead of holding steady, it began to thin, not fully dissolving but losing its dominance. Elias could see more of the movement beneath it now, more of the structure that didn't align with the exaggerated form. He leaned forward slightly instinctively. Careful, Nava said. I'm just looking, Elias replied. You are focusing. Is that a problem? No. Elias relaxed slightly. Good, because I don't think I can stop now. The flicker came again, longer this time. Not a full reveal, but enough to create a clear disconnect between what he saw and what he knew was there. He inhaled slowly. Okay, that's definitely not matching. No. So the entire projection is designed to mislead, he continued. To challenge. Right, Elias said. Challenge. That's the nicer word. The resonance peaked, then steadied into a constant presence. The figures around them stopped moving entirely, their forms now almost indistinguishable from the distortion itself. Elias felt something shift, not in the room, but in his perception. The instinct to define, to categorize, to immediately understand what he was seeing began to loosen. It didn't disappear, but it stepped back, allowing something else to take its place. Observation. He looked at her again, more calmly this time. Not trying to solve the image, not trying to guess the truth behind it, just seeing what was there, moment by moment. You're not hiding, he said quietly. No. You're just not showing everything at once. Yes, Elias nodded slowly. That's actually fair. There was a brief silence, but it felt different now. Not like something waiting to be filled, but something complete on its own. He let out a small breath. All right, he said. I think I understand a little more now. How much? Not enough to be confident, Elias replied, a faint smile forming. But enough to stop pretending I know what I'm doing. That is progress? He chuckled softly. You say that a lot. Because it is often true. Elias straightened slightly, the tension in his posture easing. Okay, he said, then I'll keep going. The resonance held steady, the distortion thinning just enough to remind him that what he saw was not the whole truth. And for the first time, that didn't bother him. The resonance did not vanish when the chamber settled. It softened as if satisfied. The circle of figures eased apart, their presence no longer pressing but quietly attentive. Elias stood with his hands at his sides, aware that something had ended and something else had begun, though no one had announced either. So, he said, glancing at her, is this the part where everything suddenly makes sense? No, she replied. He nodded. Good. I'd be suspicious if it did. The distortion around her thinned, not abruptly, but with the same patience that had guided everything here. It did not collapse. It stepped aside. The exaggerated outline lost its authority, and beneath it, her true form emerged. Not all at once, not dramatically, but with a clarity that felt earned. Elias did not move. He noticed first the balance he had sensed before, now visible without contradiction. Her posture held a quiet certainty, her movements precise without being rigid. Her features were unmistakably close to human, yet refined in ways he could not immediately define. And there, unmistakable, were the long ears, elegant, subtle, a difference that did not separate but completed the image. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Okay," he said softly. "That's very different from what I expected." "That is the intention," she replied. Elias tilted his head slightly, studying her without the urgency he might have felt before. "I was completely wrong," he added, almost thoughtfully. "Yes," he smiled faintly. "You're not going to let me soften that, are you?" "There is no benefit in softening accuracy." "Fair," Elias said. "I appreciate consistency." The chamber shifted again, the figures around them stepping back further, their forms now clearer as well. The projections faded across the room, revealing a variety of individuals, each distinct, each composed with the same quiet precision. Elias glanced around, then back at her. "So everyone's been seeing illusions this whole time?" "Yes." "And everyone made assumptions?" "Yes." He let out a quiet laugh. "That's actually kind of brilliant." "It is effective." He nodded. "It is. Annoying, but effective." She studied him, her gaze steady. "You are no longer resisting." Elias considered that. "I think I ran out of energy to resist," he said. "Or maybe I realized it wasn't helping." "That is growth." He smiled slightly. "I'll take it." The space between them felt different now. Not smaller, not larger, just clearer. The uncertainty that had filled it before had shifted into something more stable, something that didn't demand immediate answers. "So what happens now?" he asked. "You decide," she said. Elias blinked. "That's it? No final test? No hidden condition?" "No." He looked at her for a moment, then glanced at the others, then back again. "That feels almost suspicious." "It is not." "Of course it's not," he murmured. He took a slow breath, letting the quiet settle around him. For the first time since arriving, he wasn't trying to interpret every detail, wasn't trying to predict what came next. He simply stood there, aware of the choice in front of him. "I thought this would be about appearance," he said after a moment. "Then I thought it was about misunderstanding. Now I'm starting to think it's about something else entirely." "It is about perception," she said. Elias nodded. "Yeah, I'm starting to get that." He shifted his weight slightly, his expression thoughtful but no longer uncertain. "You know," he added, "back on the station, I would have made a decision like this based on a lot of surface-level things. Quick judgments, immediate reactions. And now?" He looked at her, meeting her gaze directly. "Now I don't feel the need to rush it," he said, "which is new for me." "That is also growth." He chuckled softly. "You really like that word." "It is accurate," Elias exhaled, a quiet sense of clarity settling in. "I'm not here because I thought I understood this," he said. "I'm here because I didn't, and I wanted to see what that meant." She remained still, listening. "And now," he continued, "I think I understand enough to know that I don't need to understand everything. That is sufficient." He smiled a little more openly this time. "Good, because I don't think I ever will." There was a brief silence, but it felt complete. Elias straightened slightly, the last traces of hesitation leaving his posture. "All right," he said, "then I'll stay." The words settled into the space without resistance. She inclined her head slightly, a movement that carried acknowledgement rather than surprise. "You have chosen," she said. "Yeah," Elias replied. "I have." He glanced around once more, then back at her. "Just one question," he added. She waited. He smiled faintly. "Next time, any chance of a small hint at the beginning? Maybe something like, 'Don't trust the hologram'?" For the first time, her expression shifted in a way he could clearly recognize. "Where would be the discovery in that?" she said. Elias let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah," he said. "I was afraid you'd say that." The chamber brightened slightly, the structures responding as if the decision itself had altered the space. The resonance faded completely now, leaving behind a calm that felt earned rather than given. Elias stood there, no longer trying to solve the experience, no longer trying to define it. For once, he was simply part of it, and that he realized was enough.